Japan made choices that changed everything, and some decisions looked smart at the start, but they led to huge results nobody saw coming. And one move woke up a sleeping giant, and another choice ignored a clear warning, and one choice even made their own people turn against them. And these were not small mistakes. These were huge moves that locked in their fate in the Pacific. And the biggest mistake still shocks historians today when they attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, a day that changed everything, as Japan launched a surprise attack on the American Pacific Fleet. And the plan looked clever at first, because they wanted to destroy the ships before America could fight back. But they made a major mistake, because they hit the battleships, which were old, slow, and easy to hit, while the aircraft carriers were not there that day. And those carriers lived and became the most dangerous weapons in the Pacific. And every battleship Japan destroyed was replaced within months as American factories worked day and night building new ships. And even worse, the attack pulled America together right away. Because before Pearl Harbor, most Americans wanted to stay out of the war, and they were divided and unsure. But after the attack, everything changed fast, and millions of men signed up, and factories switched to war work, and the sleeping giant was now awake and very angry. But Japan's leaders missed something huge because they underestimated American industrial power. And their military leaders looked at the numbers wrong, and they thought America was soft and not ready for a serious fight. And they believed their warrior spirit would win every time. But they were wrong, because American factories could build ships faster than Japan could sink them, and one American shipyard made more ship weight than all of Japan combined. And the numbers were shocking, since America built over 100 aircraft carriers during the war, while Japan built 17 total. And American factories made planes by the thousands every month, while Japan could not keep up because their economy was smaller and their resources were limited. And they were fighting across thousands of miles of ocean, and every lost ship was gone for good, and every fallen pilot was too hard to replace. And American production kept rising, and by 1943, the gap was too big to close. And Japanese commanders saw their mistake too. The industrial monster they woke up could not be stopped. And production was not their only mistake, because they also ignored their own intelligence reports. As Japanese intelligence officers saw clear warning signs, and reports landed on the desks of commanders every week with clear data, honest notes, and careful study of America's rising strength, but the leaders threw them away. And one report showed America breaking Japanese communication codes, and another showed the real size of American industrial power. And field officers warned that their defensive lines were too thin. Yet nobody listened because pride blocked their judgment. And they believed destiny would protect them, and old values would beat Western technology. And the military culture made it even worse, since younger officers could not question older commanders, and speaking hard truth was seen as shame. So the warnings slowly stopped, and reality told a different story as American code breakers read every Japanese message, and they knew ship moves before attacks started, and they set traps days early. And this intelligence failure cost Japan everything, as battle after battle was lost because commanders refused to accept the truth. And this leads to the Midway Battle, 6 months after Pearl Harbor, which was their biggest bet, as Japan planned to take Midway Island, a tiny piece of land in the center of the Pacific, and the goal was to pull out America's carriers and destroy them. And they thought it was a trap for America, but it became a trap for them, as Japanese commanders sent their best carriers into the fight, 4 of them, the pride of their navy, with top pilots and skilled crews. But America knew they were coming, because codebreakers had found the whole plan weeks early, and American carriers waited in hiding, far past the horizon. And the battle went on for 3 days, and when it was over, Japan lost all 4 carriers and hundreds of pilots who could never be replaced, as years of training vanished in 72 hours. And this was the turning point, and Japan could never come back from Midway, as their attack power was destroyed. And from this moment on, they would only defend and fall back, while American forces moved closer each month. And losing the carriers was not even their worst mistake, because they also spread their forces too thin, as Japan tried to take half the Pacific at once. They attacked in every direction, like the Philippines, Singapore, Burma, and Indonesia, and many islands were spread across thousands of miles of ocean, and every new land they took needed troops to hold it, and their supply lines stretched too far, as ships had to travel for weeks to bring food and ammunition, and fuel use became a huge problem. And trying to defend everything meant they could not defend anything well. And when America started pushing back, Japan could not send help fast enough, and lonely outposts were cut off and taken out one by one. And the whole plan made no sense, because every island needed supplies, and every base needed protection, but they did not have enough ships or planes to handle all of it. And American forces used this weakness perfectly, as they skipped the strong islands and hit the soft ones, and left the cut-off Japanese forces to slowly fall apart without supplies. And thousands of soldiers were left on faraway islands with no food, no help, and no way home. And they guarded places that no longer mattered, and the huge stretch of land they tried to hold doomed them from the start, because they failed to protect the supply lines. And their armies could not fight without steady supplies like food, ammo, fuel, and medical gear. And everything had to move by ship across dangerous waters very far from home. And they left their supply ships with no real protection, while America used convoys with destroyers and air cover. And Japan sent slow ships alone like easy targets, and American subs chased them non-stop. And ship after ship went down under the waves. And oil tankers never reached their ports, and troop ships sank with thousands of men. And by 1944, Japan's merchant fleet was almost gone, as they began the war with 6 million tons of shipping, and by the end, less than 10% was left. And armies starved on far islands, and air forces could not fly without fuel, and factories stopped because they had no raw materials. And the submarine attacks squeezed Japan slowly, and they never built a good plan to stop it, with no convoy system, no anti-sub skills, and no safety for their lifelines. And their empire began to die from the inside. And they also treated occupied people harshly, and Japan needed the land they took for resources, labor, and strong positions, but they ruled with brutal force that made enemies everywhere. And local people were treated as lesser, with harsh punishment, forced labor, and little care for suffering. And this plan failed badly in the Philippines, where fighters attacked Japanese forces non-stop, and in China, where resistance tied down hundreds of thousands of troops, and in Burma, where local people helped the Allied armies. And if Japan had treated the people better, they might have gained real allies. But instead, they made resistance groups that damaged operations and gave important intelligence to the Allies. And this harsh rule also gave America and Britain strong propaganda, as stories of suffering made the world turn against Japan. And even neutral countries became unfriendly. Every conquered land became a drain on resources instead of a source of strength. And more troops were needed to control angry people, and supply lines were attacked again and again. And Japan took territory but made it useless. And this harsh rule led to another huge problem, which was the choice to fight to the last man, as Japanese military culture placed honor above survival, and surrender was seen as the worst shame. So commanders ordered troops to fight until they were all gone, in every island and in every battle, to the very last person. And this rule was a disaster, because when a place could not be held, defending it no longer helped, and troops who could have pulled back and fought later were lost forever, and skilled veterans were removed in last stands that meant nothing. And America learned to use this, and they cut off Japanese positions and walked past them, letting them sit and starve with no need to risk American lives in close fighting. And Japan lost trained soldiers they could not replace, and each battle used up their shrinking group of experienced fighters, and new recruits could not match the level of the veterans they replaced. And this belief also crushed morale at home, because families knew their sons and brothers would never return, as no prisoners were taken and no survivors came back. And when the war reached the home islands, this mindset made everything worse, and civilians were told to fight with bamboo spears, and schools trained children for final defense. And the refusal to consider different plans led to terrible results. And they also ignored air defense, as Japan built strong offensive air forces with good fighters and skilled pilots and strong designs at the start of the war. but they ignored everything about defending their own land. They had few radar stations and limited anti-air weapons and no real civil defense, and no plan to protect cities from air attacks. And when American bombers came, they faced almost no resistance, and cities burned with almost no opposition. And factories and other important places were destroyed step by step. And the home islands had almost no protection. And planes that could have defended the cities were sent to fight somewhere else, and anti-air ammunition was held back tightly. And by 1945, American bombers flew in daylight with almost no losses, and they hit any target they wanted, like factories, ports, travel routes, and whole cities full of people. And millions had no safe place to hide, and shelters were not good, and fire control was weak, and whole neighborhoods vanished in single raids. And the lack of air defense made Japan open to attack, and there was no way to repair it by the time they understood the mistake. And another choice made the situation even worse. Continuing the war after 1944 was hopeless because by late 1944, Japan had no chance left as their navy was gone, their air forces were broken, and their supply lines were cut, and their cities were burning. Yet the leaders still refused to think about ending the war, and they kept fighting with no path to victory. And each day cost thousands more lives, and their resources were empty, and food shortages spread across the home islands. But surrender was never talked about in a serious way because their thinking was based on honor and not strategy, and admitting defeat meant shame. So they kept a war going that they knew they could not win, and this choice forced millions into pain that did not need to happen, and cities that burned in 1945 could have been saved, and soldiers who died near the end died for nothing. And even when Germany surrendered in May 1945, Japan fought on alone with no friends, no hope, and no chance to turn the war around. And the leaders' refusal to face the truth made the final months the deadliest, and more Japanese people died in 1945 than any other year. And the worst was still ahead because their next choice caused an ending nobody wanted when they rejected surrender terms. As in July 1945, the Allied powers sent a clear order to surrender completely or face total destruction. And the message was simple, and Japan got it, but the leaders chose to ignore it. And some commanders thought they could still bargain, and others felt honor meant they had to fight no matter what. And the choice to reject the offer locked in Japan's fate. And what followed changed warfare forever, because America had built a new weapon, something Japan could not imagine, a superweapon that could erase a whole city in seconds. And if they had accepted the terms, 2 cities would still be standing, and hundreds of thousands would still be alive, and the war would have ended in July instead of August. But pride and old military habits blocked their thinking, and unconditional surrender felt impossible, so they risked their whole nation. And on August 6th, reality arrived, and then again on August 9th, as 2 cities vanished, and surrender finally came. But the price for those extra weeks was terrible, and rejecting the terms became their final massive mistake. And they also suffered from poor pilot training plans, because early in the war, Japan had some of the best pilots in the world who were skilled, well-trained, and strong in combat, and they ruled the skies at first. But Japan made a major mistake with this advantage because they never sent their best pilots home to train new ones, and the veterans stayed in the fight until they were lost, and all their knowledge died with them. And new pilots got very little training before being sent into battle, while America did the opposite, as they sent experienced pilots back home, often to teach the next group and share real combat lessons and improve tactics. And by 1943, the difference was huge, because American pilots had hundreds of flight hours before they fought, while Japanese pilots sometimes had less than 100 total, and the skill gap became too big to close. And new Japanese pilots did not live long enough to gain real experience, and every loss made the problem worse. And in the end, Japan had to use desperate steps. Pilots with almost no training were sent on missions they had no chance to survive, and the final operations were basically sending people to certain ends. And the failure to build a steady training program destroyed Japan's air power. And they also ignored new technology. As Japan started the war with good tools like solid aircraft, strong ships, and decent weapons, but they failed to keep improving, while America kept creating new things. And their best fighter at the end of the war was hardly better than the one from 1942, while America introduced faster, stronger, longer-range planes every year. And the same thing happened in radar gear,
radio gear, anti-air systems, and engine design, because America kept moving forward while Japan stood still. And part of this problem came from limits in their economy, since research and development needed resources they did not have, but part came from their culture, because leaders did not value innovation and believed their gear was good enough if pilots just showed enough brave spirit, and technology came second to willpower in their minds. And this belief proved fatal, as by 1945 Japanese equipment was generations behind, and American fighters beat Japanese planes in every way, and radar-equipped ships found Japanese forces long before anyone could see them. And this giant technology gap meant even skilled Japanese crews fought at a huge disadvantage, and mixed with all their other bad choices, it guaranteed defeat. And one more choice made the situation even worse, which was wasting resources on battleships, because Japan believed giant battleships would rule naval combat, and they built the Yamato and the Musashi, the biggest battleships ever made, with huge guns, thick armor, and they stood as symbols of power. But they were already outdated before they were finished, as the future was aircraft carriers, not battleships, since planes could attack from far away while battleship guns needed close range to work. And building these ships used steel and labor that could have built more carriers or many destroyers or hundreds of planes. And the battleships did almost nothing, as Yamato spent most of the war in port, and when it was finally sent to fight, it was sunk by aircraft without using its main guns. And Musashi had the same end after being hit by many air attacks and sinking without helping any real battle. And the resources burned on these giant ships showed everything wrong with Japan's plan, as they built for the past and not the present, while America built carriers and submarines, which were the real tools that mattered in the Pacific. And Japan also failed to use submarines the right way, since they built good submarines that could travel far, but they used them wrong, because Japanese plans told submarines to attack enemy warships like carriers and battleships only. And America did the opposite, as American subs hunted cargo ships, tankers, and supply vessels, and they slowly strangled Japan's economy. And Japan could have done the same because America's long supply lines across the Pacific were open, and tankers and cargo ships were easy targets. But Japanese subs rarely attacked these ships and waited for chances to strike warships, but those chances were rare and well defended. And this mistake was massive, because sinking one tanker had more impact than hitting a warship. But Japanese military culture saw attacking cargo ships as dishonor. So their submarine fleet, which could have been a strong weapon, did very little, and it became another wasted advantage, and another decision that helped guarantee their defeat. Japan kept making the same mistakes in many areas because their Army and Navy did not work together, and the Army and Navy barely talked to each other, and they acted like separate groups with different goals, and often they ended up working against each other. And this caused huge problems and wasted a lot of time and money, because the Army planned attacks without telling the Navy, and the Navy made choices that went against Army plans, and they didn't share resources or help each other as they should have. And the Army made its own planes, and the Navy made different planes, and there was no standard system or cooperation in building or designing equipment. And intelligence was not shared either, so the Navy might know something important that the Army needed, but pride and rivalry kept the information apart, and this made everything weaker compared to America, where all branches worked together under one command, and they shared intelligence and planned operations together, and combined resources to get the best results. And Japan's divided system meant that they often fought themselves as much as the enemy, and they had conflicting goals, wasted resources, and missed chances to work together. And on some islands, the Army and Navy refused to cooperate even when under attack, and they kept separate headquarters, separate supply lines, and sometimes different defense plans. And this division hurt Japan through the whole war, and it was a self-made wound that never healed. And another big problem was underestimating Chinese resistance, because when Japan invaded China in 1937, they thought they would win quickly, and the Chinese army seemed weak, badly equipped, and divided by their own conflicts, and Japan believed they could take China in a few months. But 8 years later, they were still fighting, and hundreds of thousands of Japanese soldiers were stuck there, facing endless guerrilla attacks and constant ambushes, and supply lines always under attack. And these soldiers could have been used against America in the Pacific, but they stayed in China and achieved nothing of real value. And the Chinese would not give up, and even after huge losses, they retreated inland, kept fighting, and sometimes burned their own cities, so Japan could not take them intact. And Japan never changed their plan and kept sending resources to China, hoping for full victory that never came. And this campaign drained Japan before the Pacific War even started.
Their army was tired and resources ran out, and they got almost nothing useful from the land they controlled. And this China campaign was a strategic black hole that used everything Japan put into it and gave nothing back. And another huge mistake was poor intelligence on America, because Japanese leaders believed things that were not true. And they thought Americans were too soft to fight a long war, and that American soldiers had no real fighting spirit. And they thought American factory numbers were fake. And all of these guesses were wrong. And when intelligence agencies gave accurate reports, leaders ignored them if they did not match what they already believed. And they did not understand American culture and could not believe a democracy could fight harder than a military state. And they misjudged American determination after Pearl Harbor, because the attack made America want total victory, not peace. And they also miscalculated industrial capacity by huge amounts. And when told that American factories could build a ship a day, they thought it was a lie, but it was real. And this bad intelligence meant Japan made all their plans based on fantasy and not reality. And every decision they made relied on wrong ideas. And by the time they realized the truth, it was far too late to fix anything. The gap between what Japan thought and what was real doomed them from the start. And this wrong thinking caused more huge mistakes, like not building enough cargo ships, because winning in the Pacific needed moving food, fuel, ammo, and all equipment across huge oceans, and everything had to go by ship. And Japan started with some cargo ships, but they never built enough replacements. And American submarines sank cargo ships faster than Japan could make new ones. And each ship that went down meant less supply for their scattered forces. And Japan focused on building warships instead, carriers, destroyers, and combat ships, because they seemed more important than boring cargo ships. And this was backwards, because combat ships need fuel and ammo delivered by cargo vessels. And without cargo ships, warships could not work. And America understood this very well. And they built cargo ships in huge numbers, like Liberty ships and Victory ships, which had simple designs and were made fast and cheap. And by 1944, Japan's supply system had fallen apart, as islands ran out of food, air bases had no fuel, and troops could not be moved between positions. And the lack of cargo ships slowly killed Japan's ability to fight. And their empire could not survive without the merchant fleet they failed to protect or replace. And simple logistics beat their complex military plans. And another huge problem was ignoring peaceful solutions, because war did not have to start in 1941. And diplomatic talks were still open, and deals could have been made, and compromises were possible. But Japan's military leaders rejected all peaceful options because they thought using force would reach goals faster. And pride and honor made compromise seem weak. And some Japanese diplomats tried hard to find solutions and suggested alternatives to war, looked for ways to ease tensions, and tried to find common ground with America. But the military overruled them every time. And talking was seen as weak. Real strength came from action, not words. And rejecting diplomacy meant Japan chose war even when other choices existed. And they picked the path that led to total defeat. And even after war started, chances to reduce damage or negotiate were ignored. Even when talks could have made a deal, Japan still acted the same. And their leaders chose to fight until the end and never compromise. And honor was more important than survival. And if Japan had valued diplomacy as much as military action, millions of lives could have been saved.
but they chose differently and paid the highest price. And believing victory was destiny was perhaps Japan's biggest mistake, because they thought fate was on their side, and that their willpower and spirit could overcome any lack of resources. And this belief blinded them to reality. And when they got bad news, they ignored it. And when faced with impossible odds, they still insisted they could win. And when logic said to retreat, pride demanded attack. And the idea of certain victory spread through every level of decision-making. And commanders planned operations thinking they would succeed. And intelligence that said otherwise was thrown out. And resources were used based on wishful thinking, while American forces had no such illusions, as they measured the odds carefully, planned based on what was real, and changed strategy when situations shifted. And Japan's belief in destiny made them rigid and unable to adjust when plans failed. And the original plan was followed even when it was clearly not working. And this mental mistake made every other error worse, as poor logistics became terrible, because they believed spirit could make up for it. And falling behind in technology was ignored because they thought destiny would win. In the end, destiny did nothing, and real strategy, real resources, and careful planning decided the result. And Japan had ignored them all.